My stepmother gave me 30 days to move out, so I gave her 24 hours. She immediately regretted it. Can you imagine burying your father one day, and the very next, his widow, wearing your dead mother's pearls, slides an eviction notice across the table? She thought she'd finally broken me, that she'd won the war. But what she didn't know was that my father had already laid a trap, and she was about to step right into it. To the world, Angela was the picture of devotion, the selfless second wife who nursed my father, James, through his final, agonizing year. But the truth? She wasn't just a nurse. She was a parasite, slowly draining him, then celebrating when the host finally withered away. For a full year, she systematically isolated him in the east wing of Silver Creek, turning our home into her personal fortress. She fired the nurses I'd carefully vetted, replacing them with people loyal only to her. She controlled his phone, his visitors, even his pain medication. My own father. He was a prisoner in his own house. She played the grieving widow perfectly, dressed in designer silk for doctor appointments, while I was out in the brutal frost, pruning vines until my fingers bled, keeping this estate alive. That was our dynamic. Angela curated the illusion of wealth. I was the one creating it, day in, day out. I was only 24, a junior enologist, and frankly, the only person here who knew a Cabernet from a Merlot. While Angela was busy liquidating my father's assets to fund her pathetic socialite fantasies, I was the ghost haunting the fermentation tanks, checking sugar levels at 3 a.m., negotiating with distributors, fiercely protecting the Silver Creek label. People always ask me, "Why did you stay, Morgan? Why, after 18, didn't you just pack a bag and run from all that dysfunction?" They called me weak, said I had a victim complex. But they didn't understand the invisible chain that binds a survivor. I didn't stay because I was afraid of her. I stayed because this estate wasn't just land and buildings to me. It was history. It was my mother's sweat in the soil, my father's name etched onto the very gate. Leaving? That would have been admitting Angela owned this place. And I refused, absolutely refused, to give her that satisfaction. I wasn't some victim trapped in a house. I was a guardian. I was protecting a legacy. I endured her insults, the cold dinners, the way she looked at me like I was a stain on her pristine carpet, because I knew that as long as I was here, the vines would survive. I'd been the silent operator, the keeper of the flame, just waiting for the wind to change. But staring at that eviction notice, realizing she intended to kick me out before my father's body was even cold, that's when I knew my silence had officially expired. Angela thought she was pruning a dead branch. She had no idea she was cutting into the root of a poisonous plant she knew nothing about. She wanted a war for this estate? Fine. But she'd forgotten one crucial thing. I knew exactly where the bodies were buried, and I knew exactly which lever to pull to bring her whole damn house down. Angela didn't even wait for the 30 days. She started erasing my father the very next morning. The slam of a heavy van door ripped me from my thoughts, pulling me to the kitchen window. A luxury consignment vehicle idled in our driveway. I watched, my stomach twisting, as two men in white gloves carried out my father's vintage leather armchairs, his precious collection of first-edition nautical maps, the hand-carved desk where he'd signed the original deed to this land. And there was Angela, on the porch, pointing, directing, a glass of champagne in her hand at 10 a.m. She wasn't just selling things. She was liquidating his memory to fund her own future. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper, tight with a fury I was barely containing. "Those are not yours to sell." Angela just laughed. A brittle, high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "Everything is mine to sell, darling," she cooed. "I'm the surviving spouse. You're just a tenant overstaying your welcome. I'm simply clearing out the clutter. We need to make room for the new vision." Her new vision? Turning Silver Creek into some tacky event center. Later that afternoon, a developer arrived. A slick guy in a cheap suit who looked at our ancient vines like they were weeds. I heard Angela proudly detailing her plans: bulldoze the south acreage, the oldest Pinot Noir vines in the entire county, to put in a concrete parking lot and a wedding pavilion. "Wine is such dirty work," she'd said, wrinkling her nose. All mud and bugs. Events are where the real money is. We'll keep a few rows for photos, of course, but the rest has to go. A physical sickness bloomed in my gut. It wasn't just about the money for her. She wanted to destroy the very identity of this place, to strip the soul from the land and replace it with a hollow, soulless shell of luxury. It was the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Angela had no intrinsic value, no talent, no history, no genuine connection to anything real. So she had to destroy what was real to make herself feel significant. She was trying to turn 100 years of history into a quick cash grab because, deep down, she knew she was absolutely nothing without a checkbook. The house felt hollow, echoing with ghosts as I passed through the empty spaces where my father's life used to be. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just walked to my room and packed a single bag. Angela, of course, was waiting. She smirked when she saw me in the hallway. Finally leaving, she sneered. Good. Make sure you take your trash with you. I just smiled back, a slow, tight smile. Oh, I'm just getting started, Angela. Enjoy the view while it lasts. I retreated to the cellar. It was the only place on the estate Angela never dared to go. Too cold, too dark, too full of the honest work she despised. The air down there, it smelled of oak, of rich earth, of patience. My sanctuary. I walked past rows of dusty barrels to the back wall, to a specific wooden crate marked 1998. My birth year. My father had laid down 12 bottles of Cabernet then, promising me, since I was a little girl, that we'd open them when the season changes. Well, the season had changed all right. It was winter now. A long, hard winter. I pried the lid off the crate. And inside, nestled in the straw, there were no wine bottles. Instead, a heavy, fireproof lockbox. And a thick envelope. My name, in my father's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I sank to the cold concrete floor and tore it open. Morgan, the letter began. If you are reading this, I am gone. And if you are down here, it means Angela has done exactly what I feared she would do. I read those words, and for the first time since the funeral, the tears finally came. Not from grief, no. From pure, overwhelming relief. My father hadn't been blind. He'd seen everything. He wrote about the nights he pretended to be asleep while Angela berated me. About the bank notifications he'd quietly tracked, the money she siphoned from the operating accounts. He explained his silence. I was sick, Morgan. Too sick to fight a war on two fronts. If I had confronted her then, she would have made your life a living hell. She might have found a way to contest the will before I could secure it. So I played the part of the dying, foolish old man. I let her think she was winning. I let her think she was in control. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, watching her treat you like a servant in your own home. But I needed time. I needed to build a fortress she could not breach. The letter detailed everything. His silence wasn't weakness. It was a strategy. He'd been the silent guardian, enduring his own form of torture, all to ensure that when the moment came, I would have the weapon I needed. I am sorry I could not protect you loudly, he wrote. But I have protected you legally. Inside this box is the key to the kingdom. Take it to Dr. Richard. And then, Morgan, take back our home. I wiped my eyes. The tears were gone. In their place, a cold, hard resolve. I stood up, clutching that lockbox to my chest like a shield. Angela was upstairs, probably planning which part of my heritage to pave over next. She thought she was the queen of this castle. She had no idea the king had just left the keys in the dungeon. I drove straight to Dr. Richard's law offices, my father's executor and oldest friend. That heavy, fireproof lockbox sat on the passenger seat like a silent co-pilot. I didn't even call ahead. I strode past the receptionist and straight into his office. Richard looked up from his desk, saw the box in my arms, and let out a long, heavy sigh. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. He stood up, locked the door behind me, and we sat in tense silence while I keyed in the code my father had left in the letter. The lockbox hissed open. Inside, a single flash drive and a hard copy of a document bound in thick, blue legal paper. Richard took the document. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages he'd clearly helped draft years ago. "This," he said, his voice steady and professional, "is the irrevocable trust deed. Your father transferred the entire Silver Creek estate, the winery, the brand rights, the land, into a trust in your name 3 years ago. Technically, Angela has been living in your house for 36 months. She has no claim to the property." "None." I nodded. I'd expected that. My father had hinted at ownership, but I never knew the precise mechanics. But then Richard turned the page. "But that's not all, Morgan. There's an addendum here. We call it a poison pill clause." He explained that my father had been terrified Angela would try to harm me the moment he passed. He wanted to ensure that if she acted out of greed, she would pay dearly for it. He pushed the document toward me, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. It stated Angela was entitled to a marital stipend, a generous monthly allowance drawn from the estate's profits, on the condition of good behavior. But the clause was ruthlessly specific. If Angela attempted to sell any estate assets, or tried to evict the primary beneficiary, me, within 30 days of his death, that stipend would be immediately and permanently voided. My eyes devoured the words. My father, he had weaponized her greed. He knew she wouldn't be able to wait. He knew she'd try to liquidate the vintage furniture, try to kick me out before the grass even grew on his grave. By serving me that eviction notice yesterday, and by selling his desk this morning, Angela hadn't just been cruel. She had financially committed suicide. "She pulled the trigger," Richard said softly, almost reverently. "She violated the terms less than 48 hours after his death. She gets nothing. No allowance. No payout. She leaves with what she came with." I sink back into the leather chair. The cold, brilliant calculation of it all, it took my breath away. My father hadn't just built a shield. He'd built a guillotine. And he'd waited for Angela to stick her own greedy neck right under the blade. I looked at Richard. "She thinks she's selling the house tomorrow," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Richard's lips curled into a smile, a sharp, almost shark-like expression I had never seen on him before. "Then I suggest we go tell her she's trespassing." The next morning, exactly 24 hours after she had so gleefully served me that eviction notice, I walked into the kitchen. Angela was there, already dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, sitting with a woman I recognized as a high-end real estate agent. They were laughing, clinking coffee cups, discussing listing prices and staging strategies. My father's old, comfortable chair was pushed ignominiously to the side, replaced by sleek, modern stools that screamed out of place against our rustic stone walls. Angela looked up, her smile tight, dismissive. "Good morning, Morgan. This is Brenda. She's helping me get the property ready for market. I assume you're packing? You only have 29 days left." Silence was my opening move. I walked deliberately to the coffee pot, poured myself a cup, and then, with slow, measured movements, pulled my father's chair right back to the head of the table and sat down. Angela's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," she hissed. "I'm in a meeting." "I'm afraid your meeting is over," I said, my voice utterly calm. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a formal notification from Dr. Richard's office, outlining the activation of the poison pill clause. Angela glanced at it, scoffed, then started to read. I watched her face. It was a fascinating, mesmerizing study in the anatomy of a downfall. First, confusion, then disbelief, and finally a pale, shaking terror. The silence in that kitchen stretched until it was almost deafening. The real estate agent looked between us, eyes wide, sensing the tectonic shift in atmospheric pressure. "This is a joke," Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands were trembling so violently the paper rattled against the table. "This isn't legal. He wouldn't do this to me." "Oh, he did," I said. "He knew exactly who you were. He knew you'd try to sell this place before the flowers on his grave had even wilted. So he made damn sure that if you tried, you would lose everything. The stipend, the allowance, the car. It's all gone, Angela. You breached the contract. You evicted yourself." She sprang up, knocking her chair over with a crash. You little witch, she screamed, her composure finally shattering. I was his wife. I nursed him. I deserve this money. You deserve nothing, I replied, still not raising my voice. You isolated a dying man. You abused his daughter. You tried to destroy his legacy for a quick payout. You gambled on his weakness, but you forgot to account for his intelligence. I stood up. My shadow fell across her paperwork like a final, decisive gavel stroke. You gave me 30 days to get out of my own home, I said, my voice stripping ice. The trust gives you 0. But I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you until the locksmith arrives. That's about 45 minutes. Angela looked desperately at the real estate agent for an ally, but the woman was already scrambling, packing her bag, clearly wanting no part of this train wreck. Angela turned back to me, her eyes wild, desperate. I'm not leaving. You can't make me. Actually, I can, I said. I've already called the sheriff. He's on his way to remove a trespasser. And since you just voided your own prenup, I suggest you start packing whatever you can carry. Those Louis Vuitton bags you bought with the operating budget? They might be all you have left. The sheriff arrived about 10 minutes later. He didn't need to use force. His mere presence was enough. Angela screamed about fairness, about her sacrifice, about how she'd given everything to a man who betrayed her. But as she dragged her designer luggage down the gravel driveway, her expensive heels sinking uselessly into the very dirt she despised, she looked small. The grandeur, the illusion, it was all gone. She was just a woman who had gambled on greed and lost absolutely everything. I watched her car disappear down the long, winding road. When those tail lights finally faded into the distance, the silence returned. But it was different this time. Not the tense, suffocating silence of walking on eggshells. This was deep, heavy, like the earth after a cleansing storm. I called the locksmith, had every tumbler in the house changed, and then I walked out to the vineyard. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the rows of vines. I went to the edge of the south acreage, the place Angela had wanted to pave over. The soil was cold and rich beneath my boots. I could almost feel the life in it, the dormant energy waiting for spring. The invisible chain that had bound me here for so long, the fear that if I left, it would all die, was finally gone. It was replaced by a different weight. The weight of ownership. The weight of responsibility. But this was a weight I chose to carry. I'd brought a bottle with me. One of the 1998s from the crate. But I didn't drink it. Instead, I pulled the cork and poured the dark, ruby liquid onto the ground at the base of the oldest vine. A libation for the ghosts. For my mother, who planted this precious seed. And for my father, who watered it with his silence, so it could survive the drought. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I disagree. The best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about preservation. It's about standing in the wreckage of someone else's greed and realizing you are the one holding the seeds of the future. Angela wanted to erase the past to build a monument to herself. I saved the past to build a future for this land. That's the justice of the soil. We don't just cut down the weeds. We plant something stronger, something better, in their place. I looked out over the valley, my valley, and I took a deep, cleansing breath of the cold air. The war was over. The work was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, I was truly ready for the harvest. So tell me, have you ever had to stay silent, enduring abuse, just to win a bigger war in the end? Have you ever had to protect something precious, something irreplaceable, from someone who just couldn't see its true value? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I really want to hear what you have to say.